A single glass shattered against the worn linoleum floor of Riverside Diner, silencing the usual evening chatter as Evelyn Wilson froze, her eyes fixed on the black sedan that had just parked outside. Through the steamy windows, she could make out the silhouette of a man she'd spent 9 years running from. Her daughter Maddie swung her legs from the corner booth, oblivious to the danger, humming softly while coloring outside the lines of her activity book. The child's auburn hair caught the golden sunset streaming through the windows, highlighting features unmistakably belonging to the man now stepping onto the sidewalk. "Take your coloring to the back room, sweetheart," Evelyn whispered, her trembling hands adjusting the worn apron tied too tightly around her waist. The familiar weight of fear settled in her chest as she watched her daughter skip away, carrying secrets in her innocent smile. The diner's bell chimed as the door opened, bringing with it the crisp October air and the imposing figure of Theodore Harrington, whose mere presence caused the room's temperature to drop. His tailored suit stood in stark contrast to the humble surroundings of the Riverside establishment where locals came for comfort food and gossip. For 9 years, Evelyn had built a life of anonymity in Savannah, a city large enough to disappear and yet small enough to feel safe, until now. Every late-night shift, every missed school play, every sacrifice had been made to keep Maddie away from the dangerous world her father commanded with an iron fist. The whispers followed Theodore as he chose a booth by the window, overlooking the slow-moving Savannah River that had witnessed countless secrets carried away by its currents. "Coffee black," he ordered without looking up, his voice carrying the authority of a man unaccustomed to being denied. Evelyn's co-worker Patty nudged her forward, unaware of the history swimming in the space between server and customer. "Table 7 needs you, honey," she said, pushing the coffee pot into Evelyn's reluctant hands with a smile that didn't reach her worried eyes. The weight of Theodore's gaze felt physical as Evelyn approached, years of practiced invisibility failing her with each step across the worn floor. She poured his coffee with a steadiness she didn't feel, her wedding ring long pawned, but the pale strip of skin still a reminder of promises made and broken. "I didn't come for trouble," Theodore said quietly, his fingers brushing hers as he reached for the sugar. The first contact in nearly a decade. His touch sent electricity through her veins, awakening memories she'd fought to bury beneath the weight of survival and motherhood. In the kitchen doorway, unnoticed by either adult, Maddie stood watching with curious eyes that had always asked questions Evelyn couldn't answer. The child's head tilted slightly, recognition dawning in features too young to mask such profound realization. 9 years of bedtime stories without fathers. 9 years of careful half-truths and redirected questions had led to this moment, a collision of worlds Evelyn had desperately tried to keep separate. Her daughter took one tentative step forward, then another, drawn by an invisible thread of blood and belonging. Evelyn felt the air change before she saw her daughter moving across the diner floor, small shoulders squared with determination that mirrored her father's. The coffee pot slipped from her grasp as Maddie reached Theodore's table. 9 years of secrets about to shatter louder than any falling glass. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath as the little girl stood before the city's most dangerous man, her small finger pointing up at his surprised face. "That's my dad," she announced with childlike certainty that silenced the room. "Mom told me not to tell anyone." Theodore's coffee cup froze midway to his lips, his eyes, the same shade of amber as Maddie's, widening with recognition of his own features reflected in the child before him. Something shifted in his expression, the calculated coldness giving way to something raw and unguarded. Time suspended as Evelyn watched her carefully constructed world collapse, powerless to stop the truth that had escaped in a child's innocent declaration. The protective walls she'd built brick by brick were crumbling, leaving her exposed in the crosshairs of a past she couldn't outrun. The diner patrons pretended not to stare while stealing glances at the unfolding drama, their hushed whispers creating a current of speculation that rippled through the room. Theodore's bodyguards tensed by the door, hands moving instinctively toward concealed weapons as the situation shifted unpredictably. "What's your name?" Theodore asked, his voice softer than anyone in the room had ever heard from the notorious businessman whose reputation inspired fear throughout the city. His eyes never left the child's face, drinking in details as if memorizing a map to treasure long thought lost. Maddie tilted her head, confidence unwavering as she replied, "Madison Elizabeth Wilson, but everyone calls me Maddie except when Mom is mad at me." Her small hand remained extended toward him, expectant and fearless in a way only children can manage when facing the unknown. Theodore's gaze flickered briefly to Evelyn, who stood frozen between fight and flight, before returning to the daughter he hadn't known existed. "Would you like to sit with me, Maddie?" he asked, gesturing to the empty bench across from him with unexpected gentleness. The little girl climbed onto the vinyl seat, with the ease of someone claiming her rightful place, arranging her coloring book and crayons on the table between them. "I drew our family," she announced, pushing a crayon drawing forward. 3 stick figures labeled Mom, Me, and Dad with a question mark. Theodore studied the drawing with an intensity usually reserved for business contracts worth millions, his manicured fingers tracing the question mark beside the tallest figure. "You've known about me for some time," he stated rather than asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the emotion threatening to crack its edges. Evelyn finally broke from her paralysis, rushing forward to place a protective hand on Maddie's shoulder as the reality of exposure crashed over her. "This isn't the place," she whispered urgently, her eyes pleading with Theodore while scanning the diner full of witnesses to their family secret. The power dynamic shifted visibly as Theodore stood, his imposing height casting shadows across the table while he buttoned his suit jacket with deliberate slowness. "My car is outside," he stated with the quiet authority that had built his empire, leaving no room for refusal despite the politeness of his tone. Maddie gathered her crayons with methodical care, unaware of the tension crackling between the adults or the significance of what she'd set in motion. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked, slipping her small hand trustingly into Theodore's much larger one, as if they'd done this 100 times before. Evelyn watched her daughter's easy acceptance of the stranger who shared her blood, years of careful warnings about not talking to unknown men, evaporating in the face of biological recognition that transcended rational teaching. The primal connection between father and child had rendered her protective measures obsolete in seconds. Theodore guided Maddie toward the door, pausing to address Evelyn with unexpected consideration. "You should come with us." His words formed an invitation rather than the command she'd braced herself for, surprising her enough to follow despite every instinct screaming to grab her daughter and run. The bell above the door chimed again as they exited the diner, leaving behind a room full of witnesses who would spread the story across Savannah before morning light. Evelyn felt their curious stares burning into her back as she stepped into the cool evening air, crossing a threshold beyond which nothing would remain the same. The sleek black sedan waited at the curb, its engine purring softly as Theodore's driver held the door open with practiced efficiency and expressionless professionalism. "After you," Theodore murmured to Evelyn, his hand resting lightly on Maddie's shoulder as the child bounced eagerly on her toes, adventure outweighing apprehension. Inside the vehicle's leather interior, worlds apart from their modest apartment above the laundromat, Maddie explored with curious fingers, while Evelyn perched tensely on the edge of her seat. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the car's gentle hum as they pulled away from the life she'd carefully constructed. Theodore watched Maddie's delight with something like wonder, softening his usually stern features, the city lights painting his face in alternating patterns of shadow and illumination. "Somewhere we can talk," he replied, eyes meeting Evelyn's with unspoken questions that had waited 9 years for answers. The car glided through Savannah's historic district, passing beneath Spanish moss that hung from ancient oaks like silent witnesses to secrets carried through generations. Maddie pressed her face to the window, leaving small fingerprints on the immaculate glass as she pointed excitedly at landmarks illuminated by streetlights. Evelyn cataloged escape routes at each intersection, old habits resurfacing despite the unexpected civility of their reunion. She watched Theodore watching their daughter, trying to decipher the emotions crossing his face: surprise, calculation, perhaps even something resembling tenderness. "She has your eyes," Evelyn said finally, breaking the heavy silence between them as the car turned onto a private drive leading to a stately home overlooking the river. The admission felt like surrendering a piece of armor she'd worn too long, revealing the vulnerability beneath. Theodore nodded slowly, studying Maddie's profile with newfound intensity. "And your determination," he observed, a hint of admiration coloring his tone as the car came to a stop before wrought iron gates that swung open without command, recognizing the master's return. The estate sprawled behind manicured hedges, its columns and verandas speaking of old money and quiet power rather than the ostentation Evelyn had expected. "Pretty," Maddie exclaimed, unbuckling herself with practiced ease while the adults remained frozen in a moment, suspended between past and future. "You disappeared without a trace," Theodore stated without accusation, his voice low enough that Maddie couldn't hear as she pressed her nose against the window. "Not even my best people could find you." he added, something like respect tempering the underlying hurt in his admission. Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap, calloused from years of honest work, a stark contrast to the manicured perfection she'd once maintained as the girlfriend of Savannah's most eligible bachelor. I had help, she confessed, thinking of the sympathetic court clerk who'd falsified her documents when she'd learned who Evelyn was running from. The driver opened the car door, letting in a rush of jasmine-scented air that reminded Evelyn of another lifetime. Cocktail parties on this very veranda, whispered promises beneath garden trellises, and the exact moment she'd discovered the true nature of Theodore's business empire. The memories washed over her with unexpected potency, weakening her resolve. Maddie bounded up the steps ahead of them, fearless and curious as childhood allows, while security personnel materialized from shadows to maintain discreet positions around the property. Their presence confirmed what Evelyn had always known. Theodore's world remained as dangerous as the day she'd fled it. "Does she know anything about me?" Theodore asked as they followed their daughter at a more measured pace, his question carrying the weight of 9 years of absence. His hand hovered near Evelyn's elbow without touching, respecting boundaries while clearly wishing to breach them. Evelyn watched Maddie twirling on the marble entry floor, her second-hand sneakers squeaking against the polished surface as chandelier light caught in her auburn curls. "Only what she's pieced together herself," she admitted, guilt and justification warring in her voice as she added, "She's intuitive, like you." Theodore gestured toward his study, where a housekeeper had already prepared tea service with an efficiency born of long service. "Tell me everything," he requested, rather than demanded, closing the door partway, but leaving it open enough to keep Maddie in view as she explored the grand foyer under the watchful eyes of staff. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after I discovered what you really do," Evelyn began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands as she accepted the teacup he offered. The porcelain was delicate, imported from England, a reminder of the refined veneer that had always covered the brutality of his business. The truth poured out between them like the steaming tea, years of silence giving way to confession, as Evelyn described her terror upon discovering both her pregnancy and the extent of Theodore's criminal activities within days of each other. Her words formed a bridge across the chasm of years and misunderstanding, offering context if not absolution. Theodore listened without interruption, his expression unreadable except for the slight tightening of his jaw when she described giving birth alone in a strange city, naming their daughter without him, celebrating first steps and words that he would never witness. The missed moments hung between them, irretrievable, yet demanding acknowledgement. "Why now?" Theodore asked finally, setting down his teacup with precision that betrayed his inner turmoil. Outside the study window, a security detail patrolled the manicured grounds, a reminder of the dangers that had driven Evelyn away in the first place. Evelyn watched Maddie through the partially open door, the child's wonder at the grand staircase a stark contrast to their modest apartment. "I didn't plan this," she confessed, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. "We've eaten at that diner every Friday for 3 years. You've never come before." Theodore's phone buzzed with incoming messages he ignored for perhaps the first time in his business career, his priorities visibly shifting in real time. "I bought the building last month," he explained, a humorless smile touching his lips. "I was doing a routine inspection of new properties." The irony hung between them. After years of sophisticated searching, blind chance had accomplished what his resources couldn't. Evelyn felt the weight of fate in this coincidence, wondering if some invisible hand had finally tired of their separation and intervened with cosmic indifference to her carefully laid plans. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked, the question hovering between them like smoke, impossible to grasp yet impossible to ignore. Her fingers twisted nervously in her lap, calluses from years of honest work catching on the delicate fabric of her uniform. Theodore moved to the window, his silhouette outlined by moonlight, as he watched Maddie charm his housekeeper into showing her the crystal collection in the display cabinet. "She needs protection," he stated simply, the words carrying the weight of knowledge about enemies Evelyn could only imagine. Maddie's laughter floated through the partially open door, innocent and bright against the heaviness of adult complications. "She's needed you for 9 years, Evelyn countered, the accusation softened by the resignation in her voice, both acknowledging that blame served no purpose now. Theodore turned, shadows playing across features that had hardened with responsibility since Evelyn had last seen him up close. "I want to know her," he said, vulnerability breaking through his carefully maintained composure. "I've missed everything," her first words, first steps, First day of school. Evelyn pictured their daughter's baby book, hidden in a shoebox beneath her bed, filled with milestones Theodore would never witness. She likes pistache ice cream, she offered tentatively, extending an olive branch in the form of knowledge only a parent would treasure. And she's allergic to strawberries. Something softened in Theodore's expression as he absorbed this information, storing it away like precious cargo. Would you allow me to take her for ice cream? He asked, the question framed as a request, rather than the demand Evelyn had expected from a man accustomed to commanding empires. Maddie appeared in the doorway as if summoned by the mention of dessert, her eyes bright with excitement, that dimmed slightly when she sensed the tension between the adults. Are you fighting because of me? She asked, with the direct insight that had always made her seem older than her years. Theodore knelt to her level, a position of vulnerability Evelyn had never witnessed from him before. No, Maddie, he assured her, his voice gentler than Evelyn had thought possible. Your mom and I are just figuring things out, grown-up things that have nothing to do with you being wonderful. Maddie studied him with her amber eyes, his eyes, before nodding with solemn acceptance. Can we still get ice cream? She asked, practical priorities asserting themselves with childlike directness that drew unexpected laughter from both adults, breaking the tension that had filled the room. The night air carried the scent of salt from the nearby river, as Theodore's driver navigated them toward the historic district, where an exclusive ice cream parlor remained open for the city's elite. Maddie pressed her face against the window again, unaware of how the security detail in separate vehicles created a protective bubble around them. Theodore watched their daughter's excitement with newfound wonder, as if seeing the world through fresh eyes. Does she know about what I do? He asked quietly. The question weighted with awareness of the violence and power that had built his empire and kept them separated for 9 years. She knows you're a businessman with important meetings, Evelyn replied carefully, the half-truth sitting uncomfortably between them as the car stopped before an elegant storefront. Crystal chandeliers illuminated marble countertops inside, a far cry from the corner bodega, where they usually bought popsicles on hot summer days. The ice cream parlor staff snapped to attention as Theodore entered, their deference telling Evelyn that nothing had changed about his standing in the city. She watched warily as the manager personally escorted them to a private alcove overlooking the river, menus appearing without request. Maddie swung her legs beneath a chair meant for patrons twice her size, unintimidated by the luxury surrounding her or the respectful distance maintained by other customers. Do you have a swimming pool? She asked Theodore between spoonfuls of pistachio ice cream, her directness drawing a genuine smile from her father. I do, he answered, watching her with undisguised fascination, cataloging each expression and gesture as if making up for lost time. And a library full of books about pirates, he added, having noticed the adventure novel peeking from her backpack during their drive. Evelyn observed their interaction with conflicting emotions, joy at her daughter's happiness battling with terror at what this connection might ultimately cost them both. Every path forward seemed fraught with danger, returning to their life of anonymity now impossible, yet integrating into Theodore's world unthinkable. Theodore's security detail maintained discreet positions throughout the parlor, their earpieces and vigilant eyes scanning for threats that might emerge from shadows. Their presence emphasized the reality Evelyn had fled, that loving Theodore meant accepting a life where danger lurked constantly at the periphery. Why didn't you tell me? Theodore asked when Maddie left to examine the display of handmade chocolates, his voice low and controlled despite the hurt evident in his eyes. The question contained multitudes. Why didn't you tell me about our child? About your fears? About your plans to leave? Evelyn traced patterns in the condensation on her water glass, buying time before meeting his gaze. Would it have mattered? She asked, genuine curiosity beneath the challenge. Would you have chosen us over your empire if I'd told you I was carrying your child? Theodore's silence provided the answer she'd always feared, his hesitation confirming that 9 years ago, he would have tried to have everything, the power, the danger, the family, without understanding that some treasures cannot survive in darkness. His empire had been built on compromise, but a child's safety allowed for none. I can protect you both now, he said finally, the promise carrying weight earned through years of accumulated power and influence. His hand reached across the table, stopping just short of touching hers, respecting boundaries while clearly wishing to breach them. The chocolate shop attendant wrapped Maddie's selection in gold foil while Theodore's credit card appeared without comment, the transaction conducted with the efficiency of those accustomed to serving power. Evelyn watched their daughter chattering happily with the staff, uninhibited by the social hierarchies that defined adult interactions. "Protection isn't enough," Evelyn stated quietly, as Maddie skipped back to their table, chocolate treasure clutched carefully in small hands. "She needs a father who can attend school plays without bodyguards, who won't make her a target for your enemies." Theodore considered this truth with the calculated assessment that had built his empire, weighing risks and benefits with practiced precision. "What if I could give her both?" he proposed, the question hanging between them as Maddie returned to the table, oblivious to the negotiation determining her future. The drive back to Evelyn's apartment was quiet, Maddie dozing against Theodore's shoulder with the easy trust of childhood. Evelyn watched his careful stillness, his arm positioned to support their daughter's weight without disturbing her rest, instinctive protectiveness emerging without instruction. As the car slowed before their modest building, reality crashed back with jarring force, the contrast between Theodore's world and the life Evelyn had built for them stark in the flickering streetlight. "This isn't over," he stated simply, as his driver opened the door, the words both promise and warning. Morning light filtered through thin curtains as Evelyn prepared breakfast, the previous night seeming dreamlike, until she noticed the business card on her countertop, Theodore's private number handwritten on the back. The elegant cardstock stood out among her bills and grocery lists like a jewel in sand. Maddie emerged from her bedroom clutching the gold-foiled chocolate from the previous night, preserved rather than eaten, a treasure too precious to consume. "Is he coming back today?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the hope evident in her eyes as she climbed onto her usual stool. Evelyn considered lying before recognizing the futility. Her daughter's perception had always been too keen for easy deception. "I don't know, sweetheart," she answered honestly, setting a bowl of cereal before Maddie while her own appetite remained lost somewhere between fear and possibility. The apartment felt different somehow, as if Theodore's brief presence had altered its dimensions, making their carefully constructed life seem suddenly insufficient. Evelyn moved through morning routines with mechanical precision, while her mind raced with contingencies and possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. A knock at the door shattered the fragile normalcy they'd been maintaining, the sound echoing like a thunderclap in their small space. Evelyn froze, recognizing the precise rhythm that had once been their private signal in another lifetime, when romance still outweighed danger in her calculation of their relationship. Theodore stood in the hallway, transformation evident in his attire. Gone was the intimidating suit, replaced by casual slacks and a button-down that might have belonged to any successful businessman rather than one of the city's most feared power brokers. The deliberate normality of his appearance struck Evelyn as both effort and artifice. Maddie bolted past her mother with excited recognition, hesitating briefly before throwing her arms around Theodore's legs in a spontaneous embrace that caught them all by surprise. The child's instinctive acceptance created a bridge neither adult had known how to build, forcing them across divides of history and hurt. "I brought breakfast," Theodore offered, holding up a bakery box from the city's finest patisserie, as if unsure of his welcome despite their daughter's enthusiasm. His eyes sought Evelyn's permission, another novelty from a man accustomed to taking rather than asking. The pastries sat untouched on their small kitchen table, while Theodore produced a second offering, a slim document folder placed beside the bakery box with equal care. "Legal documents," he explained, sensing Evelyn's questioning look. "Bank accounts, trust funds, property deeds, everything Maddie needs for security." Evelyn leafed through pages of legalese while Maddie showed Theodore her collection of seashells gathered from weekend trips to Tybee Island, each one catalogued with meticulous care. "Financial security doesn't solve our fundamental problem," Evelyn stated, pushing the folder away despite the astronomical figures that could change their lives. Theodore watched their daughter arranging shells by size and color, fascination evident in his expression as he discovered another piece of her personality. "I'm prepared to make changes," he stated, the words carefully chosen and weighted with significance beyond their simplicity. The implication hung between them as Maddie continued her impromptu shell exhibition, unaware of the seismic shift occurring in her parents' carefully separated worlds. "What kind of changes?" Evelyn asked, skepticism warring with a dangerous flicker of hope she'd thought extinguished years ago. Theodore's gaze remained fixed on their daughter, his voice low enough that only Evelyn could hear his response. "Legitimate businesses only," he offered, the concession clearly difficult for a man whose power had been built in shadows. "A complete separation from previous operations, overseen by independent trustees." Evelyn had imagined this conversation countless times during sleepless nights, never believing it could actually materialize in her small kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday morning. "Why now?" she challenged, needing to understand if his motivation extended beyond the novelty of newfound fatherhood. Theodore finally met her gaze directly, years of unsaid words passing between them in silent communication that had once been their strength. "Because I've built an empire with nothing that matters to inherit it," he answered with unexpected rawness. "Because I want something real before it's too late." Days stretched into weeks as an uneasy routine formed. Theodore visiting each evening after Maddie's school, bringing books about pirates and shells from distant beaches that expanded her collection. Their daughter blossomed under his attention, her natural curiosity finding fertile ground in his endless patience for her questions. Evelyn watched their relationship grow while maintaining careful distance, protective barriers weakening despite her determination to remain vigilant. Theodore's promised changes materialized in newspaper headlines, announcing his surprising divestment from several businesses and properties across the city. A prestigious law firm delivered documentation weekly, charting the dismantling and reorganization of Theodore's empire with methodical precision. Evelyn reviewed each page with skepticism that gradually yielded to cautious hope as legitimate business opportunities replaced shadowy enterprises in his portfolio. The neighborhood noticed their changed circumstances, curious glances following the expensive car that delivered Theodore each evening, whispers trailing Evelyn at the supermarket where she still shopped, despite no longer needing to count pennies. Their precarious position between worlds created isolation neither had anticipated. Maddie's school called one afternoon, concerned about the unfamiliar man picking her up despite being on no approved list. Theodore's security team had smoothed over the situation, but the incident highlighted the complications of their arrangement. A father with no legal standing, a family without formal recognition. "We need to decide," Theodore stated one evening after Maddie had fallen asleep. Legal papers spread across Evelyn's kitchen table outlining custody arrangements, financial provisions, and security protocols. The documentation represented months of effort to bridge their separate worlds with structures that might support them all. Evelyn traced her finger over Maddie's name typed formally on custody documents, the legal reality catching up to the biological truth their daughter had recognized instantly that night in the diner. "She deserves consistency," she acknowledged, years of sole decision-making giving way to tentative partnership. Outside, rain tapped against windows while Theodore's security detail maintained their vigilant positions, a reminder that some dangers couldn't be eliminated through legal restructuring alone. "I've purchased property outside the city," he offered quietly, sliding photos of a riverside home across the table. Private but close enough for schools and normal life. The house in the photos offered everything Evelyn had dreamed of providing for Maddie: space to grow, security without isolation, beauty without ostentation. She recognized Theodore's thoughtfulness in the selection. The property neither a mansion nor a fortress, but a home where childhood might flourish normally. "What about your business interests?" Evelyn asked, practical concerns surfacing even as she felt herself yielding to possibility. The question contained multitudes. Would he truly step away from power? Could he survive without the adrenaline of risk? Would old enemies accept his retirement? Theodore's expression revealed the battle between ambition and newfound priorities. His empire built through ruthless determination, now weighed against a daughter's smile and potential future. "The transition is already underway," he answered, determination evident in the set of his jaw. "Legitimate operations only, managed through blind trusts overseen by independent directors." Rain intensified outside, drumming against the roof of their small apartment, as if nature itself emphasized the magnitude of their decision. "And us?" Evelyn asked, the question encompassing more than custody arrangements or living situations, addressing the unresolved current between them that Maddie had sensed from the beginning. Theodore reached across the table, his hand covering hers with warmth that triggered memories of another lifetime. "One step at a time," he offered, neither presuming nor dismissing possibilities beyond their shared commitment to their daughter's well-being. The apartment buzzer interrupted their moment, its harsh electronic tone startling in the quiet evening atmosphere. Theodore's posture changed instantly, protective instincts evident as he moved toward the door with controlled urgency while signaling Evelyn to check on Maddie. The security team's leader stood in the hallway, rain dripping from his overcoat as he delivered his message in professional undertones. "There's been an incident at the waterfront property," he reported, maintaining composure despite the clear urgency. "Protocol requires immediate relocation of all principals. The safe house overlooked the river from a different vantage point. its understated elegance concealing state-of-the-art security systems and reinforced construction. Maddie explored the children's bedroom with delight, discovering bookshelves stocked with her favorite titles and art supplies, arranged on a desk beneath windows sealed with bulletproof glass. "Someone from my past," Theodore explained once their daughter was asleep, exhaustion evident in the lines creasing his forehead as he accepted the coffee Evelyn offered. The transition created resentment among certain associates who preferred the old business model. Evelyn absorbed this information with surprising calmness, years of preparing for worst-case scenarios allowing her to function despite the danger. "Will they try again?" she asked practically, needing facts rather than reassurance as she mentally catalogued emergency exits and security protocols. Theodore's phone buzzed continuously throughout the night, his security team implementing contingency plans with military precision, while he remained focused on Evelyn's questions. "The threat is being neutralized," he stated with controlled precision that reminded her of his other life, the power he wielded beyond their domestic tableau. Morning brought federal agents to their door, their badges representing agencies Evelyn had never imagined would be allies rather than threats. Theodore welcomed them with resigned familiarity, leading them to a study where conversations occurred behind closed doors while Evelyn distracted Maddie with pancakes shaped like sea creatures. "An opportunity," Theodore explained later, tension visibly lifted from his shoulders as he joined them for a late breakfast. "My cooperation in exchange for immunity and witness protection. A clean break that ensures safety for all of us." Maddie concentrated on drowning her pancakes in maple syrup, unaware of the adult complexities unfolding around her breakfast ritual. "Can we still go to the aquarium Saturday?" she asked, priorities firmly rooted in 9-year-old logic that provided grounding perspective amidst life-altering decisions. Theodore's smile contained equal measures of wonder and sadness as he absorbed their daughter's resilience. "The aquarium will have to wait," he explained gently, finding his way into the unfamiliar territory of parental disappointment management. "We're going on an adventure to a new home, somewhere with an even bigger aquarium." Federal marshals outlined their relocation timeline with efficiency that left little room for sentiment or second thoughts. 3 days to dismantle their lives, select essentials that wouldn't compromise their new identities, and say goodbye to a city that had been both haven and prison for different reasons. Evelyn packed Maddie's treasures with careful consideration: the shell collection, favorite books, and photographs that could be explained in their new life without revealing connections to the past. Each item represented a piece of their history that might safely transition to their future without bringing danger along. The riverside cottage Theodore had purchased became part of their cover story, a property listed publicly for sale while they disappeared to a different state with new names and fabricated histories. The sacrifice of this dream home symbolized everything they were leaving behind, both the dangers and possibilities of their old lives. Theodore spent their final evening in Savannah handling legal matters with his attorneys, ensuring Maddie's financial security through trusts so deeply buried that even those hunting them would never connect these assets to their new identities. His business acumen, once directed toward empire building, now focused solely on protecting what truly mattered. Their departure occurred before dawn, federal vehicles with tinted windows arriving without lights or sirens to transport them to a private airfield outside the city. Maddie slept through the transition, waking only as they boarded the unmarked plane that would carry them toward their new beginning. Evelyn watched Savannah disappear beneath them as the plane climbed through cloud cover, the city lights fading like the life they were leaving behind. "No regrets?" Theodore asked quietly, his hand finding hers in the dim cabin as their daughter slept peacefully across their laps. The Pacific Northwest welcomed them with misty mountains and dense forests that couldn't have been more different from Savannah's humid beauty. Their new home sat nestled against protected woodlands, the property's boundaries secured by both natural features and discreet security systems installed by the Marshal Service. Maddie adapted with the resilience of childhood, embracing their cover story of relocation for her father's new job with a prestigious environmental conservation foundation. Her new school welcomed her curiosity, teachers noting her exceptional knowledge of marine life, a passion nurtured through Theodore's countless books about oceans during their brief time together in Savannah. Evelyn found unexpected freedom in their new identity as Mrs. Calloway, the fabricated marriage certificate and matching rings providing legal structure to their complicated reality. The small medical clinic where she worked part-time valued her efficiency and compassion, colleagues unaware that her calm handling of emergencies stemmed from years of navigating far greater dangers. Theodore channeled his strategic mind into environmental investments through the legitimate foundation that provided their cover, his business acumen finding purpose in preservation rather than power. The transformation surprised him most of all, satisfaction derived from protecting endangered habitats proving more fulfilling than controlling city blocks. Their modest home filled gradually with new memories: Maddie's science fair ribbons, hiking boots muddied from family expeditions to nearby trails, board games with pieces occasionally missing after particularly competitive evening tournaments. Normal life unfolded in ways none of them had experienced before, its ordinary rhythms extraordinary in their simplicity. The marshal assigned to their case visited quarterly, his professional assessments noting their successful integration into the community, while monitoring for any signs of their past resurfacing. "The situation in Savannah has been resolved," he reported during his second-year evaluation, the clinical phrasing disguising complex realities Theodore understood without elaboration. Evelyn planted a garden that first spring, her hands working rich soil instead of balancing diner trays, watching seeds transform into sustenance through patient nurturing. The metaphor wasn't lost on any of them. New life requiring both protection and freedom to grow toward the light. Theodore built Maddie a treehouse that summer, consulting architectural references with the same intensity he'd once applied to business acquisitions. The structure evolved beyond simple platforms to include weatherproof bookshelves, a retractable canvas roof for stargazing, and a pulley system for hauling up important supplies like cookies and juice boxes. Neighbors invited them to community gatherings with increasing frequency, as their initial reserve was interpreted as typical newcomer adjustment, rather than strategic caution. Theodore surprised himself by enjoying these social connections, finding value in conversations uncomplicated by power dynamics or hidden agendas. Maddie's 11th birthday arrived with the milestone of her first sleepover party, the home filled with giggles and whispers that represented normal childhood Evelyn had always hoped to provide. Theodore hovered nervously at the periphery, his protective instincts challenged by the developmentally appropriate need to allow their daughter expanding independence. The photograph arrived on a Tuesday, delivered in a Marshal Service envelope with official stamps suggesting routine communication. Inside, a single image showed the Savannah Riverside Diner, now renovated into an upscale cafe bearing a new name and ownership. The transformation complete except for a small memorial plaque near the entrance honoring its history. Evelyn recognized the significance immediately, the final severance of their past, confirmation that their previous lives had been successfully erased from public record and memory. The diner where everything changed now existed only in their private recollections, the physical space repurposed beyond recognition. Theodore kept his promise, attending Maddie's school events without security detail, applauding her science presentations on marine conservation with genuine pride, untainted by the hypervigilance that had marked their early days together. His transformation from power broker to environmental philanthropist provided purpose that filled the space once occupied by ambition. The small jewelry box appeared on Evelyn's pillow on an ordinary Thursday evening, its presence both question and statement, after 3 years of rebuilt trust and shared parenting. Inside nestled a simple band with 3 small stones, past, present, and future, represented in tasteful elegance rather than ostentatious display. Maddie discovered them on the porch swing that evening, her father's arm around her mother's shoulders as they watched the sunset together. "Are we finally going to make it official?" she asked with the direct insight that had always been her gift, homework temporarily forgotten as she assessed this new development with approving interest. The wedding occurred in their backyard the following spring, attended only by carefully vetted friends from their new community, unaware of the significance beyond what appeared to be a simple formalization of an existing relationship. Maddie served as both flower girl and ring bearer, her joy complete as the family bond received public acknowledgement after years of necessary secrecy. Thank you all for following this story of redemption, protection, and second chances. What would you have done in Evelyn's position? Would you have trusted Theodore's transformation? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you enjoyed this journey from secret revelation to new beginning. Your support makes these stories possible, and I can't wait to share the next one with you.